Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Advocacy Manager Reagan Stone. Texas hasn't elected a statewide official, meaning governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. senator, or commissioner that isn't a Republican in over 30 years. To dive into this fact and understand just where anti-Texan MAGA BS has taken us, I couldn't think of a better scoundrel to shine light on than our all-hat, no facts Texas Agricultural Commissioner. Old Sid Miller, elected in 2014, doesn't embody the friendly state, but he does more closely align to a level of corruption typically reserved for Russia and the like. While this stuff really pisses me off, and I'm sure is irritating at the very least to you too, we do have a big surprise to make sure to keep the tea sweet while we chat. I invited a good friend and regular on the pod to share this burden with us. Today's guest is a fifth-generation Texan, rancher, and son of a public servant. He fought for rural health care, breaking up big ag, getting money out of politics, and serving, well, y'all, the people. Welcome back to the show. Joining us from Lampasas, Texas, Clayton Tucker.
Howdy, howdy. Thank y'all so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here today as well. Clayton, we're definitely going to dive into Sid in a bit, but first, you've got an announcement here today. Please share with our audience what's next in your plans.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be throwing my hat into the race for Texas Agriculture Commissioner. I think it's about time we get a progressive populist back in that seat, just like good old Jim Hightower once had it. And to get the TDA, the Texas Department of Ag, to work for the family farms, for the folks, not for just big ag anymore.
And we are going to get into a lot of that here. Congratulations on the announcement. And of course, thank you for coming to Progress Texas to be one of the first to tell your story. Please tell us a bit about you growing up, your formative years, and what you've been up to since baling hay and mending fences with the grandpa on your family's ranch.
Well, sure. So I remember when I was a kid, I was like maybe 9 years old. I was with my pawpaw and we were out, as you said, baling hay, and we saw smoke coming from our neighbor's farm. So grab some burlap sacks, thing of water, take off down the road. And I asked my pawpaw, why are we going to go help instead of waiting for the fire department? And he told me, well, Mr. C, because neighbors help neighbors. And I think that's the essence of what it is to be a Texan. You know, the essence of what it is to be a good neighbor. Now, I didn't necessarily grow up as a Democrat. I grew up in a very split house. Some of the family was Republican, some of the family was Democrat. So it made family unions interesting. But I never really identified as a Democrat until I got really interested in history, particularly the Great Depression, learning all about FDR. And that's when I realized FDR and the New Dealers created my family. You know, my family, both sides of my family came from extreme poverty. One side were day laborers, the other side picked cotton and hunted squirrels during the winter to survive. But it was because of progressive populist policies from the New Deal, from the Democrats, such as, you know, the GI Bill, Social Security, the Works Progress Administration. All these things gave my family the boots they needed to pull themselves up and out of poverty. So I quickly became a Democrat. That was also right around when Obama ran. Then I ended up studying international relations at college. I lived abroad, got to experience how the other half of the world lives, and just realized so much here is a corporate scam. Our health insurance is just straight up a scam. And I came back, that's right when Bernie came on the scenes, and been politically organizing ever since. I still run the family farm. Another reason I came back is because my family gave me the "you're the oldest child of the oldest child" call, so it's time for you to return. So been ranching and working in politics ever since.
That's quite a big duty you've undertaken. Of course, you know, you've also started a small business, wrote a book. You said, you know, like you've worked with Jim Hightower. And for those that don't know, that was the Texas Agricultural Commissioner during the Ann Richards days, the last time all those offices were filled by Democrats. And besides your day job right now with Trade Justice, that's an education fund which fights for fair trade policies, you're also a co-founder of Texas Grassroots Alliance, a member of the State Democratic Executive Committee, founder and president of the Texas Progressive Caucus, and secretary of the Texas Farmers Union. So you are everywhere, sir. So,
I'm a man of many hats.
A man of many hats. And instead of hitting on each position, you've already kind of, started a little bit, and you got ahead of me on there of saying, your why. But, kind of why are you running for Texas Ag Commissioner? And part two, maybe this is where we can go. Why should folks support your cause, support your candidacy?
Look, I believe that fundamentally all Texans really just want the same thing. We all want to live happy, healthy lives, doing what we love with those we love as long as we can. It doesn't matter if we're rural or urban, white, black, or brown, fifth generation or newcomer. We all just want to live happy and healthy lives. The problem is we have politicians who would rather divide and distract us so they can send kickbacks to their mega donors, to their greedy few. Even if you look at the current agriculture commissioner, Sid Miller, he's been bought and paid for by Tyson. Look at his donation records. You'll see Tyson right there. I do believe that when we start rejecting scapegoating, once we start rejecting all this finger pointing and actually come together as Texans, we can create a Texas that works for all people, not just transnational corporations, not just the billionaires, but all working Texans.
You couldn't have said it better. And, Ag Commission, the Texas Department of Agriculture, it ain't as unknown per se as the Oil and Gas Regulatory Agency, the Railroad Commission, which has nothing, of course, to do with railroads, but it also isn't an attorney general or comptroller. In my opinion, those jobs are a little better known. I do get that the Agricultural Commission works with farmers and ranchers, but it also does a lot more. School lunches, rural healthcare, just to name a couple. And so in your words, what is the mission of the agency, and why should Texans be paying attention?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is that if you eat food, you need to care about this department. You could almost rename it the Texas Food and Farm Department, maybe the Department of Food and Farms. Because at the end of the day, yes, the Texas Agriculture Commission does do a lot, and I made a lot with school food. And we already have a pretty big issue with child hunger in this state. Last stat I saw was like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Texas kids go to bed hungry each night, which is absolutely unacceptable. But I would also argue it's much bigger than that, because we've had a very conservative, small-minded view of what the Department of Agriculture could really do. During the Jim Hightower era, Hightower was the person who created the organics market. Texas led the nation organics market because Hightower created that. The Department of Ag created that a lot of folks, particularly in the cities, really like about. But he also went after the unregulated use of pesticides that was poisoning people, that was giving folks cancer. We still have a big issue with pesticides, but a new environmental issue we're having is PFAS, PFOAs, these forever chemicals. They're poisoning Johnson County. We're going to have major water issues. Water wars are already kind of starting, particularly East Texas and West Texas. And there's also a lot more that I think the department can be doing, like promoting regenerative styled farming and ranching where it can be implemented, because that form of ranching or farming increases water conservation. So that's another way we could actually protect our soil and protect our health. Because in my mind, the TDA could be a major way that we limit climate change here in Texas.
I know you did some deep diving. You were mentioning all the different places that the Department of Agriculture could start to put its mind towards in solving a lot of these issues. Water rights, the droughts that we're having. Of course, it can't stop a drought, but we can plan ahead. You just wrote, a big, what I would call an op-ed or a paper on one particular issue there in East Texas. Would you like to dive a little bit more on what you found out?
Sure. So the other day, I get a call from a friend out in Palestine, and she told me, Clayton, you got to get out to Palestine. There's a town hall going on. You have to get out here. And I trust her, so I just packed up and went. And it was about 200 folks there. And what's going on is you have these two billionaires that are about to take, I kid y'all not, 98.9% of all their water. It would devastate the local aquifer. It would devastate the local communities. You're talking family farms would collapse. Industries and businesses would collapse. Housing prices would collapse because guess what? You buy a house, but then 10 years later, there's no more water. Well, what's that house going to be worth? So there's a big fuss, and thankfully the folks are getting organized. And this is an issue that both Republicans and Democrats, you had the Republican club and the local Democrats working together on this issue, because as this one local county commissioner said, that water is not oil. It's not a commodity like oil, because if you don't have water, then you literally have nothing, which I thought was a very interesting statement from certainly a very Republican county commissioner.
Yeah, and so you're noting there's folks, of course, perhaps not immediately jumping up and supporting you, but definitely talking about the issues that you're bringing to the forefront here. That is obviously an very polar extreme opposite to kind of backing up to the beginning here. Our person we're going to use for a great example of someone not to support, or rather a better way of saying that they're not supporting us, the people, and that is old Sid Miller. We aren't totally sure if he will run again yet, but boy, oh boy, I know it's time to send him home. And in case our audience needs a refresher, this is the guy who got a Jesus shot, meaning a bunch of B12 injected into him in Oklahoma on your dime. And I don't think it just cost a dime. He did get called out and he repaid the taxpayer. But among other stories and controversies, Sid's top aide pled guilty to a felony for prompting Texas farmers to pony up $55,000 in payments to secure an exclusive license to grow hemp in this state. That's according to an arrest warrant. And by the way, a Texas hemp license at the time cost $100. Sid chose not only to defend his aide, who is now a felon, but he hired him back at $218,000 a year, as well as his aide's wife, using our cash. My question, how the hell is this guy still in office?
Well, he's in office because he's a bootlicker, but not for we the people. All he cares about is corporations, these big ag corporations. Tyson, as I mentioned, JBL probably. I mean, they may talk a mean talk when it comes to fighting for family farmers, but at the end of the day, he goes with who pays him, and that's these big corporations, which is just absolutely disgusting in my opinion.
You do have a connection to a different former ag commissioner, and that is Jim Hightower, a true people's champion. And besides y'all's similar ages when running for the position, of course, that he ran, over 50 years ago, and he's quite a bit older than you now, but he was a young man at the time. And y'all have a pretty big similarity on your progressive populist take on affairs. Are there any lessons you might share from him or others that maybe you've talked to that have held that top job or ran in the previous years? Anything that, maybe that you're looking to bring back?
Sure. I just wanted to take Texas back to what it used to be. I mean, Texas was the home of populism. It was the home of progressive populism. When Texas was founded, it was so populous, we didn't even allow bankers. And here's a little bit of history that the Republicans have conveniently whitewashed from our history, is that Texas literally founded the progressive populist movement. About 5 miles from my family ranch and here in Land Passes, 1880s. A group of ranchers got together just mad at the monopolies and the robber barons just destroying their small businesses. So they got together, they formed the National Farmers Alliance Industrial Union. A few other folks a couple of decades later formed the Texas Farmers Union that I am the secretary of. And they got to organize. They were really fighting for all these progressive ideas. They eventually found their champion through President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and they became the New Dealers. And that's where we got these big, bold Democratic ideas of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, GI Bill, everything that the Republicans are trying to defund so they can privatize. So, Wall Street can make even more money. that these are the legacies of Texas progressive populist. But starting in the 90s, we went corporate. And I think Texas has been suffering ever since, whether it's in terms of education or infrastructure. Things have been going downhill ever since Texas went corporate. We need to return to our progressive populist roots, which is what the campaign aims to do.
We've hit, of course, school lunches, and noting that has a big part through the Texas Agricultural Commission. We've named that, of course, rural hospitals. And I've never seen over the last 30 years, and like you, I was a young person back in the 90s, but I've never seen a rural hospital saved by a Republican. I've never seen childhood hunger necessarily decreased by a Republican. But I have seen a lot of these issues, at least at the forefront of, like you said, the 80s and the early 90s, being taken on by Democrats in Texas. So, further circling in towards your candidacy, we covered the why, and now I want to know the what. And that being, what are some issues you plan to further highlight in the race and changes you'd like to make when you get the final nod from voters next year?
The big one is to really start pushing this anti-monopoly, anti-corporate consolidation messaging. Because I'm going to be frank, even a lot of Democrats have really failed on this issue. We used to be great. During the New Deal era, the Great Society era, under FDR and LBJ, we were fantastic. Sam Rayburn did a lot. He was the Speaker of the House from Texas as well. So we used to be really fantastic on making sure the big boys don't get too big. But now, look, 4 corporations control the entire meat industry. 2 corporations control the entire seed industry. What happens to a small rural town when Walmart moves in? Now look at what's happening with Amazon. You put a product on Amazon, a couple years later, they basically reverse engineer it. They create their own. They drive you out of business. You have all these monopolies that are just continually destroying small businesses, that are destroying rural economies. And I now believe are going for the urban economies as well. The thing is, I think it all started in rural. I think it all started with what I call the ag oligarchs. And we really just, if I was going to be a single issue candidate, if I had to choose one issue, it would just be fighting them, really going after these transnational corporations that have already wrecked our economy, that they're the ones who have really been shipping our jobs overseas, though our politicians haven't really helped over the last 30 years. Ever since the 90s, they kept on saying like, oh, we have to go for efficiency. Well, if COVID-19 taught us anything, efficient systems are brittle systems. We absolutely destroyed our supply chains, our internal supply chains, I should say, since NAFTA. Part of my day job, 80% of all farmers have day jobs, or what we call off-farm incomes. I'm part of that 80%. My off-farm income is international trade policy, and a large focus on that is supply chains and creating stronger, more resilient supply chains. Texas is big. We can grow mostly of what we need. There's a few things we can't really grow here, and we just really need to create good, strong local supply chains. Some of that has been done, giving credit where credit is due, but nowhere near the scale that it's been done yet. Because again, the folks up there don't want to upset the powers that be, the powers being those big corporate monopolies that pay off our politicians.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? And, of course, please also end by telling us where we can follow you leading up to the March primary and presumably the midterm election.
Yeah, I always like ending all my talks with a story. So it was 1980, and it was just a very bad year for Democrats. We got completely wiped out. That was the year Reagan was first elected, and we lost a lot in Texas. But the Republicans do what Republicans do best. They wreck the economy. Look it up. Almost every recession, including the Great Depression, was caused by a Republican. And just look how the economy is going now with the tariffs and the trade war and the immigration raids on farms and everywhere else. So a group of Texans got together. You had former TDP executive director Gary Morrow, a columnist named Jim Hightower, the people's lawyer Jim Maddox, and this lady who you may have heard of. Her name was Ann Richards. And they decided that they were going to run as a slate. not a collection as individuals, not a bunch of different egos, but as one unified team. And that was the year we took everything. And I do believe that while history may not repeat, it can rhyme, but only if we make it rhyme. So this is going to be an uphill battle. We're going to have to really fight on how to win, which really, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I did have this interesting thought the other day that maybe Democrats and progressives have been asking ourselves the wrong question for the last 30 years. We always ask ourselves, how do we win? Well, maybe the better question is, how do we make the Republicans lose? Because I feel like that's the question the Republicans always ask. How do they make Democrats lose? Because if you actually listen to what they run on, they really only run on attacking Democrats. They really don't run on any other policy. So with that, pulling that back to 1982, those Democrats that I mentioned, Hightower, Maddox, Morrow, and Richards, they ran for something. They ran for the people, but they also ran against what the Reagan administration was doing, such as, Reagan was the one who got rid of all of our steel. Reagan was the one who really started defunding a lot of our government. And I believe that with Trump more or less doing the same thing Reagan did, just on a, new level, I think we can make history repeat.
Well, this is definitely going to be an interesting race, and just a little bit of the research and jumping on what you said there as well. I'll note that in the 2014 election with Sid Miller, there was only about 1.5 million votes that were for Sid Miller, and a little bit obviously less than that for the Democratic candidate at the time. The last time Sid got elected, he was running against Susan Hayes, and there were nearly 15 million votes. And so just the amount of folks jumping into that election and going to cast their vote, we're really looking forward to seeing what 2026 obviously brings. Thank you for joining us, candidate for Texas Agricultural Commissioner, Clayton Tucker. And we are really looking forward to continuing to follow your campaign, follow you around the state of Texas. And of course, always getting to see you at all the town halls, whether it's 10 or 15 folks at a county party, or it's, 100 folks talking about rural issues. We're here for it. But also here at Progress Texas, we're here in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine. But while that machine is funded by oil and tech billionaires, far-right religious nationalists, and more, we rely mostly on everyday Texans who value our hard work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas we want to live in. We don't do subscriptions or paywalls because we believe the message of Progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon. So if you've become a regular listener, we could use your support, and no amount is too small. Thank you to Texas House Minority Leader, State Representative Gene Wu, and members of the Texas Progressive Caucus for joining our team. Please go to progresstexas.org/donate to join them. And from everyone at Progress Texas, thank you for tuning in, and see y'all next time.
The Progress Texas Happy Hour is a production of Progress Texas, a rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. Find us online at progresstexas.org and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The podcast is produced by me, Chris Mosier, and our featured music is by Walker Lukens. Please be sure and subscribe to the Progress Texas Happy Hour on the podcast platform of your choice. Take a moment to leave us a review if you've enjoyed the show, and be sure and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. We'll see you again next week.